Anyway, what are
So
we doing?
so let's turn to the Kennedys. So I'm kind of curious. So you, in this, in like the late '60s,
that thing on.
Yeah. So you were kind of, you participated in all these protests in the '60s, and then you write a book about being a hustler. So how is it that all of a sudden you just became great friends with the Kennedys after all of that, and then you start hanging out with all the first ladies? So how do we go from hustler to the White House, I guess?
Yeah, but I think the interesting thing is I've known people of every political.
Yeah.
From Gus Hall, who was the head of the Communist Party, to Nancy Reagan. And I've always sort of separated political views from my friendship, because friendship has nothing to do with politics. Friendship has to do with what can they do for me.
Well, that's politics.
No, if you like somebody, I like Nancy Reagan a lot. I thought she was sweet and nice, and she was dear to me. And her.
How many times did you meet with her?
Well, I went to the White House a couple of times. I had lunch with her. I saw her in New York a couple of times. We had friends in common. Mm-hmm. Her best friend was a gay guy named Jerry Zipkin, who was very social, and I knew him socially here. And so when I went to the first time I met her, he didn't introduce me, but she knew who I was because of Jerry Zipkin. And he had sort of pre-certified my legitimacy as somebody who wasn't going to use her. And he was one who told me that she loved scarves, which I didn't know that, silk scarves.
So you gave some to Hillary Clinton, you gave some to Nancy Reagan.
Yeah, so when I went to the White House, I come on with these beautiful scarves. I got a silk one from him. And
come on, who is that?
He was Richard's close friend. His first name, Caumont, Caumont. He's French. I can't remember at the moment what his first name was, but he's a French designer. And he designed beautiful scarves. And so he used to live. He had kept an apartment in New York on 57th and a place in Paris. He's very close to Richard. And so so I got a scarf from him to give to her. And she was very sort of, it's funny when you do simple acts of generosity for people who aren't used to acts of generosity that are attached to some plea or some scheme, or they're simply an act of friendship. I think it's amazing how taken they are by it, how moved by it. And so I've done it with a number of women who, because women actually love scarves. And I knew Hillary and Nancy Reagan both love scarves, so I got both of them scarves.
So how did you become? We were kind of talking about how you became, you became friends with the Kennedys. You interviewed Betty Ford. So how did you?
The Kennedys happened because I was at a dinner party that Jan Cushing was a great friend of mine, and we had a sort of shared interest in that for publication, and among other things. She was was a wonderful woman, beautiful blonde. She was very social, beautiful, stunning woman, stunning. And her maiden name was Jan Golden, and then she married Del Coleman, who her first husband was was a wonderful guy, Del Coleman, who was I don't know how to put this nicely, he was the sort of the mafia's front man in Vegas. So he was the one who, like at the Aladdin Hotel, would get the license from the Gaming Commission because he was clean. Although in point of fact, the casino was owned by the mob in Chicago. And he was an immensely charming man. And I met him through Norman Mailer. And he always had a big chauffeur-driven limousine. That's how, when he was in town, that's how he got around town. So and you never receive a bill. He'd go to Rayo's, the mob place, and you'd never receive a bill, nothing. It was just fabulous. And I'll tell you a story about him. Truman Capote literally called me one day crying. And they always so awfully, I can't, can you come and see me? So he lived at the UN Plaza, so I went over to his apartment. We went down across the street to the bar. And he'd been in California. And he was in love with a guy named Jack O'Shea, who was married and had children. And Jack was a big Irishman with a temper from Long Island. And Truman had met him because Jack was the banker at the bank in Long Island where Truman had a house out in Sag Harbor where Truman would bank. And he met Jack O'Shea, who was sitting at his desk at the bank in wherever else, it wasn't Sag Harbor, East Hampton or something. And Truman came in and he had some problem with his account, and Jack was sitting at his desk, and he went over to the desk, and Jack looked at him. He knew who he was, but he had never met him. And he said, may I help you? What are you here for? And he said, I'd like to make a deposit, but not in the bank. And that's how they met. And Jack, I think Jack's still alive. He had a very beautiful daughter whose name you can look up because Truman wrote about her, but who Truman, after he fell in love with Jack, tried to make into a big model, movie star kind of thing. I can't remember what her name was now. And he got very close to Peggy, who was Jack O'Shea's wife. And even after he and Jack O'Shea broke up because Jack beat him up, he kept his friendship going with the wife and the daughter. I think
they could all sympathize with each other.
Yeah, but also it's a way to get back at Jack. And so that's how I met the wife and I met the daughter. And I never, for the life of me, understood what he saw in Jack O'Shea. For the life of me, he wasn't attractive. But he was a Truman like danger. And when you run men are dangerous, you're never bored. And I think that's the attraction. And I forget what the question is.
We were talking about how you met the Kennedys, and it was through Jan.
Oh, Jan Cushing. So I met Jan through Truman. He was a friend of Jan Cushing. And Truman and Jan was very social. And she had Del Coleman, the mobster, was her first husband. That lasted 2 weeks because they went to honeymoon in Miami Beach at the Fontainebleau, which is a mob-owned hotel. And Jan said the marriage lasted 2 weeks, as I said, because Jan at the Fontainebleau went down. Del said, I've got a lot of calls to make. Why don't you go down by the pool and sun and drink and do whatever the hell you want? And you're going to need the suite to make call business. So she went down to the pool at the Fontainebleau and suddenly realized about 20 minutes later, because the sun was really bright, she'd forgotten her sunglasses. And she went back up to the suite at the Fontainebleau to get her sunglasses, and Del Coleman, her husband of 2 weeks, was in bed with 2 hookers. And that was that marriage. And then she went on to marry, anyway, she had this dinner party. Actually, she used to have dinner parties all the time. She lived on 79th and Lex. Very beautiful apartment. Her grandmother owned most of 57th Street, real estate money. And she seated me next to Pat Lawford, who I'd never met.
Well, when was this approximately?
Let's see, it was about a year after Pat Lawford moved back from Paris. So it must have been, say, the early 70s maybe. After when President Kennedy was shot, Pat was married to Peter Lawford, and it was very unhappy. And she wanted a divorce. And Bobby Kennedy told her she couldn't divorce because it would ruin the political power of the family, because Catholics don't divorce. And they were the premier Catholic family in America. And he said, and he was going to be running for president. And he said, you can't divorce, at least until after I win. So she was stuck in this unhappy marriage. And she went to Paris, moved to Paris with the kids. And after Bobby was shot, she got divorced. So anyway, this is like, he was shot when, 68? So this is like 2 years later, I guess. So I'm at this dinner party, and she seats me next to Pat Lawford. And Jan would have dinner parties. She's somebody you would have loved. She's now up in Newport. And if you had a writer there, she loved writers and artists. I mean, she just loved them. So you'd have a dinner party. So if I was at a dinner party, she would have one of my books on each of the dinner places. And if it was Norman, there'd be one of Norman, whatever his latest book was. And so it was really, I mean, it was wonderful. I mean, she'd do it once. I was not every time. But if you had a new book out, she'd have a dinner for you. And,
that's great, yeah.
She was a wonderful, wonderful, went broke, but one too many marriages, darling. She never married money, and that's the shame of it. What was I telling you about?
So how you met
so Patty,
Pat Lawford.
So there was this dinner. And the dinner was for
And
Bill.
you had your book at each...
No, that's one. No,
that was your first one?
No, that was,
by this point you were just a guest.
But this was a dinner party for Bill Paley. And Jan had organized the party for Bill Paley, and she was having a...
And how many of you were there approximately?
10, maybe 12 people. And so I thought, yeah, 12. She'd have one big table, and then if she had more than that, she'd have another table in the living room. But it was, one big table. And she was having an affair at that time with Bill Paley, who ran CBS, when she announced the dinner party for Bill. But then they broke up, and so then the dinner party became for Bill Paley's daughter.
Wait, so she had already announced it as being for Bill Paley?
Yeah, but she made a correction. Oh, I'm so happy you.
But he was still at the dinner party.
Mm-hmm.
He came to the dinner party.
This was after the dinner. No, he wasn't at the dinner party. The dinner party was.
So his daughter came to the dinner party.
Yeah.
So she broke up with him.
Right.
He no longer came to the dinner party. But instead, his daughter came to the dinner party.
Because Bill Paley found out about her engagement with Warren Beatty, who was an actor, and got pissed off. Jan, who was still alive, was very generous in her affections, and she's a very beautiful girl. So she had no problem getting attractive men. I mean, Bill Paley, I don't know if you ever know, was not an attractive man, but...
It's attractive in certain ways.
Well, I'll tell you, Ruth Stapleton and I went to see him, and because she was raising money for her, she had a foundation called Hola Vida down in Texas. And I called Bill Paley's office, and I said I was Dotson, and I knew him socially vaguely, but he knew who I was, and one of those things. And I said, would you tell him that President Carter's sister is in town, Ruth, and we would like to see him about possibly a donation from his foundation to her foundation. And so we went to see him. Now I had gone to see him before with Pat Lawford when we were running the Lincoln Center, the Literary Arts at Lincoln Center. And Bill Paley, from that meeting on, gave us $25,000 every year to the Literary Arts at Lincoln Center. So I thought he was good for, hit him again, right? So Ruth Stapleton and I went to see him. Ruth Stapleton was very beautiful, and she was a preacher. So we arrive, and the two of us, we go into his office, a rather lavish office, and he looks at me and says, I want to pray with Mrs. Stapleton. So there is a sheet glass. So I sit out on the secretary, and he's in there, I don't think 10 minutes. And suddenly the door swings open, and Ruth comes out, come on, we're going! We go. And I said, what is the problem? Did you get any money off of him? He asked me to pray for him. So we knelt down in front of the sofa together, and he started playing with my ass. And I hate that. That we went. True.
So we're going back to how you met Pat Lawford. So you're at the dinner party.
Dinner party.
For his daughter, for Bill Paley's daughter.
And so I'm seated next to Pat Lawford because Jan thought we'd like each other. And it was like the Mopsy twins. I mean, we just admitted I remember what I said to her. I said something to her, and she started laughing, and then she replied when I started laughing. And
do you remember anything from the conversation? Do you remember anything from the conversation?
No, I knew enough not to. I'm trying to remember. I think I had out at that time. I think I had published Government Expected Me, which in certain circles were shocked. And I think we talked about the book. She asked me about the book, about writing. She was very interested in writers and writing in literary life in New York. And she once said to me that the only thing worse, she said the only thing more humiliating than being an actor is being a writer, because you spend a life being rejected. She's absolutely right. She had great sympathy for people in the arts. She did a lot for the arts. She's never given any credit for that. You know, she started as a TV producer and raised heaps of money. You go to her, she would have these wonderful dinner parties at her apartment. She lives in a Sutton Place, this wonderful apartment. And you go to the people there were, you know, you think, oh, she's going to have a typical New York high society kind of crowd, which is boring as hell. It never was. She'd have writers and politicians and singers and famous or not famous. I mean, she'd find the people because she was interested in them. She found them interesting, and she didn't find people in society interesting. And I'd go to with Ted and Pat to a fundraiser, go to a party to raise money usually for his campaign or whatever. And Ted would say, "No, meet and greet." And, you know, she was what I'm trying to say, she was very good at that. She was very good at hiding her contempt for the rich, because she had real contempt for them. I was never rich. I was around rich people a lot, but she knew them intimately. I didn't. And after the death of John and the death of Robert, her trust in, I think she distrusted the motive of those people. And she certainly didn't believe Oswald did it alone, that's for sure. It's funny because when you're in a position like we're part of that family. I mean, Ethel's the same way. You can't publicly say what you know to be true. I mean, I thought Lyndon Johnson was behind the killing. And I'm not going to put words in Pat's mouth, but I don't think she would disagree with it. But you have to, certain things you can't speak because...
So she suspected that Lyndon Johnson...
Yeah, I thought he'd done it.
Did a hit job. Do you remember what she said in that regard?
No, I don't. Well, I'm not going to say. I'll say what I thought. You know, I mean, the reason Lyndon importuned him to come to Texas. The only reason he was there because of fucking Lyndon Johnson. He hated Lyndon Johnson, but he was going to be running for a re-election, and he didn't want Lyndon Johnson turning on him. Because Lyndon Johnson controlled the southern wing, the racist wing of the Democratic Party. And so he went down there, Lyndon Johnson's invite, Lyndon Johnson's date, you know, it was all set up by Lyndon Johnson. And interestingly enough, the only one who died from the visit was Jack, and funnily enough, amazingly, 2 hours later, Lyndon Johnson was president of the United States. Isn't that remarkable? So I think Lyndon Johnson was behind it, and I think that's what relatives thought too, the Kennedys thought too.
Do they still think, is that what
I don't know,
thought?
Nobody talks about it anymore.
You had said earlier that you were basically Ted Kennedy's wingman? That you would be the date for his girlfriend?
Yeah.
When did that start?
Well, there's nothing unusual about that.
I'm not saying, I'm just asking. When did it start?
I don't know when it started. It's not just him, it's anybody. If you go on...
That's never happened to me. Anyway, go on.
If you go on, say you go on, you're with a politician and you go on a plane ride, and he's got a bottle of scotch in his briefcase. These people don't go through security, but he wants to drink on the plane. Well, suddenly the bottle of scotch is your bottle of scotch.
Yeah.
And I think it's just being cautious. Because Ted was still married at the time, and his wife was, I felt really sorry for her.
Vicky?
No, Joan.
Joan.
No, not the widow lady, no. Don't know. But you know, she was a very unhappy woman. She's still alive, isn't she? I think so. There's a lot of unhappiness in that family.
So anyway, let's go back. So you were at this dinner. You met. You were sat next to each other. You connected. What happened after that? Did you exchange phone numbers?
No, we went back to her apartment.
Uh-huh.
And I ended up staying the night. We ended up talking for another, like 3 hours, 4 hours. I mean, we just clicked. And so I stayed night, and then that Pat's apartment became sort of my Manhattan home, because I was living out in the country, first at Princeton and then at East Hampton. And so when I would come in, which I do like 3-4 days a week, I would stay at Pat's.
And where was that?
1 Sutton Place South.
And it was, what kind of, was it like a big, what was it?
This big, I can't remember, I will remember, but it was originally the apartment of some famous French designer. And
was it like a penthouse or?
Duplex. And it was the only apartment that had its living room. It was the only apartment in the building, 1 Sutton Place South, that had a balcony that overlooked the river. So you were like in the living room, and these French doors would open, and there'd be this little balcony, and you could step out, and there was the East River. There was a garden and a lawn, and then the East River. And it was one of the most beautiful apartments that I've ever seen in my life. It just was beautiful, astonishing.
And she had just a guest room that you could stay in?
Well, it had, if you walked in, they had these incredible pink marble floors as you walked in. And as you walked down the hall, to the right was a door, which you could see, because it was, you know how the French, where you can't tell there's a door there, but there's actually a door. And that led to the servants' area, where the servants' quarters and the 2 kitchens and all that.
And she had servants?
Yeah, of course. And then there was a marble hallway, and the first door you'd pass opened onto the living room, which overlooked the East River and the gardens. It was big. It was astonishingly beautiful. And the wonderful, she had, and the painting, she had this incredible woman's head by Picasso. And it was one of the things, you go to the painting and you knew right away who the artists were. She had a wonderful taste in art, but really. And then between the living room, you can enter the dining room through the entry hall, or if you're in the living room, you'd go through this small area between the dining room and the living room, which was the bar. And then you go to the large formal dining room, and then off of it was the kitchens. And the first kitchen was an eat-in kitchen. And then the second kitchen, I don't know, it was the second kitchen, but it was off the second kitchen where the staff lived. I mean, you're not servants, the staff quarters were. And then you went, the entry hall, you'd go, there was a circular staircase that went up to the second floor, although you could get onto the second floor by the elevator, because each floor, the elevator only opened onto one apartment on each floor. So you got to get off at the first floor, 6th floor where she was, or go up to the 7th floor where the bedrooms were.
So she had, the whole floor was an apartment, was her, so she had 2,
the whole floor,
it was a duplex, so she had 2 entire floors.
Not the whole floor of the building, but the whole floor of that section.
Of that section of the building.
Because there were several elevators. It was really extraordinary. I wish I could remember whose apartment it was. The famous French designer.
And so how many years did you stay at her place?
Till she died.
Which was?
Can't remember.
90s, 2000s?
I don't remember. I really don't remember. I gave the eulogy, but I don't remember.
I'll look it up now. She died in 2006.
She was quite old, though.
Yeah, she was 82.
She was so wonderful. Wonderful. One of the best people I ever met in my entire life. I loved her. When she died, it was just such a hole in my life that she left behind.
So you hung out with her all the time?
Hmm?
You hung out with her all the time?
Yeah, we traveled all over the world.
For 30 years?
Was it 30 years?
Well, if you met in the early 70s.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a lot of fun. She was great fun. She was fun. And, so we went to various places. She'd say, where do you want to go? Let's get out of New York. Where do you want to go? And I'd say, well, where have you? And she'd say, why don't we go to Italy? Or why don't we go? Yeah. And I remember, this is so typical, that she said to me one day, have you ever been to Alaska? And I said, no, I've never. She was always trying to find a place where neither one of us have been. I said, no, I've never been to Alaska. Well, why don't we go? It'll be fun. I said, there's nothing there. I said, there's trees and bears. That's nothing. I mean, why do you want to go? And I think they have a glacier. I mean, oh. So she got us on this boat in the summertime. I'm not going to go to the whole story. There's in the kitchen, you'll see a thing of our Alaska trip that I gave her, which when she died was given back to me. But we were on this boat. It's like a large yacht. Well, boring. This happened to us twice. She got us got us on these boats, and we'd be there 2 hours. Realize what a terrible mistake it was. So we're on this fucking boat. We go up this. We fly into Seattle, which is where you pick up the boat, and then we sleep overnight. When you wake up, there's Alaska. It doesn't look like anything else. It looks like everything else. It's just a lot of fucking pine trees. And you go up, and there's one pine tree after another, and you go up, yeah. So we did that for about 2 days. Nobody interesting on the boat. And because she was who she is, we had to have dinner every fucking night with the captain at the captain's table. That was supposed to be a great honor. He was the most boring man in the world.
Did everybody on the boat eventually know who she was?
We didn't stay on the boat that long.
So people weren't like coming up to you?
Know, yeah. And so we parked the boat. You don't park a boat. What do you do? Moor the boat. So we're going up the Alaskan coast, and both of us are just.
Well, didn't you bring a book or something?
Well, they had activities, darling. So we stopped at some, I don't know, Ketchup, I can't remember even that fucking town, some little nothing place, and they were just tourist traps.
Yeah.
And they wanted us to see, and Pat wanted to see it because we were going to go to see eagles. Like eagles live in Alaska. So we get off at this, I can't remember the name of the fucking tourist trap town, off this boat, and we climb up this mountain hillside to see the eagles. And Pat was not great for climbing. And about halfway up, we see the first eagle. And the eagle is this practically featherless old bird sitting in this bird cage, and he's holding on to this, one of the stick and wobbling. And at any minute he's about to topple over. It was awful. So we go back down. We're getting angrier and angrier. We get back on the boat, and I said to Pat, I can't take it anymore. He said, you're right. Next time it stops, we'll get off. So the boat stops for refueling. I have no idea where it is. It's not a town, it's just a place where you refuel a boat. So we get off, we tell them, look, we're mad. And so they throw our luggage onto this concrete dock, and Pat and I get off, and the boat leaves, and there we are. There's nobody there, and but there is a phone booth. They had phone booths. I said, "What are we going to do?" And Pat said, "We're going to call my brother. That's what we're going to do." So she calls. I do the calling. I collect the senator's office. And I turned over to some person, secretary, and I said, "This is Lawford calling him." And I said, "We're trapped." I said, "I don't even know where the hell we are." I said, "We're on some dock. There's nothing here." I said, "It's ridiculous. It's all. Oh, we were treated terribly. You've got to send a car for us." And she says, "Where are you?" And she said, "Don't get off the phone. What is the phone number?" We're at a payphone, and I told her the phone number, and she said, "Stay on the phone." And somehow with that phone number, they found out exactly where we were. And then she said, "There will be a car there from Anchorage in 2 hours. Do not leave." About an hour and a half later, this taxi showed up, Anchorage. We got in the taxi with our luggage. And we stayed at the best hotel in town. Ha! Ha! Called the American Hotel, the New America Hotel, or something, fucking America something. Oh, and there's been an earthquake in Anchorage, so the whole town was gone. So they Pat left the shop. So we're there. Well, there's nothing to do, and this is the summer, and it never gets dark. It's the weirdest thing. The light never goes away. So you got hundreds of drunken Ingrid staggering around town at 3 in the morning, and it's light out. So anyway, that's where we were. The next day, Pat found a shopping center that was underground, and then we got out.
And when was that approximately?
I don't know, I could look it up. When did she die?
2006.
76?
2006.
2006. So I would say probably around 86, 87.
So you were hanging out with her a lot.
Yeah, I saw her all the time.
And so you were closest with her.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then how did you meet the other family members? I mean, obviously through her.
Well, I met everybody through her, and they're a very close family.
Yeah.
There's a lot of certain amount of tension in the family, but they're all.
So would they come over to her place and you would meet them
If
there?
Ted was in New York, he would stay. And Chris Lawford was in California, being an actor. So his bedroom was empty. So I would stay in his bedroom. And then when the senator was in town, I had to get out because the Secret Service had to put metal plates and everything on the windows. If he was in town, and then I would stay in one of the other bedrooms. There's like 4 pads to. There were 4 bedrooms, and then with the maid's bedrooms, and so with you through the maid's bedrooms, there were probably 7 bedrooms.
And so you met him in that apartment?
No, I didn't meet him in that apartment. I met him, I was going down, I met him skiing in Massachusetts, and he and little Teddy and Patrick, and what's the daughter's name? Anyway, she's dead now. And I'll shoot, there's a picture of us. I think I had it here, a picture. Oh, I don't know where it is. He gave me a picture of me skiing. I hurt my leg skiing on the slopes. And he gave me a big, what the hell was that? A big picture of me carried down on the sled with this bad leg, and he wrote on it to Dotson, my future Secretary of State. And I don't know where that picture is now.
I'll have to find it.
Sure, I'm sure someone stole it. It's around, it's probably, I don't know, maybe I put it away somewhere.
Do you remember skiing?
No, it was skiing up in Massachusetts, and he was also running for re-election then. So it was a partially political trip. But I hurt myself on the slope, and he gave me this picture of me on the sled, being carried down.
So you hit it off? Or was it because of your injury that he liked you? What was the reason that you connected?
It was a fun, I don't think that was the first time I met him, but that's the first time where we really bonded.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a fabulous weekend. We had a lot of drinking, a lot of partying, a lot of fun. And at one point, I got really drunk. And surprisingly, everybody was drinking.
Were you all staying at like the same lodge or something?
We're all staying at the same hotel, which I should remember, but I don't.
And was it like 20 people? How many people was it?
Well, it was his kids and me and Bob, whatever his name, Ted's scriptwriter, the real prick. Cara and his kids, me and Ted and his Bob, whatever his name is, a scriptwriter, and really. But I had it was that trip where I really got close to him and.
So Pat wasn't there.
No, Pat wasn't there.
So it was just you and Ted and his family.
Yeah.
So you had been invited just because.
Then he was going to run for president in 1980.
Uh-huh.
And that was really sad. And so I went up to. He asked me he'd asked me before to go down to go. This before it was like 70, somewhere 9 days, to go down to do a report because nobody at the Kennedy Library knew me. So he asked me to go down to the Kennedy Library and come back with a report, what I thought of it, how it was being run, how the whole thing. And then he said, "You do that, and then I'm going to call whoever the head of the library was, an old hanger-on to the Kennedy family. His name escapes me now, and we should have done this interview 10 years ago." And to let him know what's going on. And I did, and I wrote a rather critical report about the library and about just how the whole way it was run and the way the exhibitions of the family and on President Kennedy and all that. I couldn't believe how amateurish it was and how second rate it just rang of.
What were some examples? Remember any examples of what was so bad about it?
Well, the tourists would go in, and the library was I.M. designed it, and it just had the biggest part of it was this huge empty glass enclosed space that overlooked the water, the bay. And then sort of attached to that was the library itself. And then tourists who would go, they didn't actually go and use the library, but they went to see the exhibition at the library, which is on the history of the Kennedy family in Boston, all that. But the exhibition was in the basement, and so you would go, you'd come into this glorious library with this, but instead of going into the library and actually enjoying the architecture, you were pushed down into this tunnel-like basement, where they had, basic, showcases showing pictures of the family, clippings, and John Kennedy's comb, and I just said it's like something you would expect to see in Indiana or someplace. I mean, there's nothing sophisticated about it, nothing. Because the family was very sophisticated, it was very urbane, and there was nothing sophisticated or urbane about this exhibit. I mean, you thought, Jesus God, was it Harold Stassen had a better exhibit than the Kennedy.
So you went on the ski trip with him.
So what?
You went on the ski trip with him.
Oh, we did a lot of things.
You got injured. You became friends. You went.
I was going to tell you the thing about ski. Yeah. I had fun, but it was little Teddy was there, and he had lost his leg, and I just was.
How did you lose his leg?
I think it was a cancer when he was a little boy, and Ted, when he was hospitalized, Ted went and literally slept on a cot in his son's hospital room. He never left his son, and the bonding between those two people was just astonishing to see. I mean, the love was just very obvious and clear. And Ted was very protective of his son. I forget what the question was.
You were going to say something about the ski trip, about little Teddy on the ski trip.
I'll tell you, we got drunk one night. Just the kid. Ted would we'd have dinner, and then Ted would go up to his room, and the adults would leave, and I'd be in the bar with the kids, and everybody would get drunk. And I got drunk one night, and they literally had to carry me. And I said, no, that's all I remember, is being in the bar. No, I don't remember. And I woke up the next morning because the maid was banging the vacuum cleaner against my naked body in front of my bedroom door. So they had undressed me and dumped me in front of my bedroom door.
This was in the hotel?
Yes.
So you were in the hallway of the
hallway,
hotel.
and my door was locked. And that's where I passed out, and that's where I was until the maid.
Had this happened a lot to you?
It happened to me only twice. It happened to me with the Kennedys.
I think once is too much. But
Stockbridge, that's the name of the town. Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And it happened to me in San Diego. So.
Who were you with in San Diego?
My photographer, Steve Shames. I was on some story. And I got drunk again. Only this time I was in bed, and all I remember is what he told me the next day, because we had to leave the hotel the next day. I apparently went down naked. Well, this is what happened.
And why were you naked?
Because I was asleep. I went to bed. I'm in a hotel. I don't have any pajamas.
Yeah.
So I went to bed naked. And it's a nice hotel, actually. And I went down. I don't remember. This is what I'm told. I went down to like 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, to the desk naked. And I started pounding on the desk saying, where's the fucking room service? I want fucking... And the guy said, we don't have it after 12 o'clock, so you're going to have... I want room service! And they called the house detective because I had no way to prove who I was. And I said, well, my friend is dead. So they called Steve Sams to come down. My photographer, and he came down and gently moved me back to my bedroom. Quite a life, right?
Yes. So you became friends with Ted Kennedy, and were you friends with him right until he died?
Yeah.
And he died, I guess, in...
2000.
It was right after, it was like 2010, right? It was Obama, right before Obama passed health insurance.
I don't know.
Obamacare, because he was the vote, remember, and then
he remarried again, Vicky.
So Vicky was later, so first it was Joan,
they divorced, and then he married Vicky.
And you were there. I heard a tape with you interviewing him and Vicky. They were
really?
both.
I don't remember that.
And they told a story of how you were there in the Bahamas, or not in the Caribbean, I can't remember where, when he proposed to her, where he hid the ring.
That's right. Out in the water.
And you were there. So
I put it on a shell in the water, and I went snorkeling.
So you were there on that trip.
Yeah.
So what was that trip? What can you tell me about that trip?
Well, I remember that. I'm trying to remember what the name of the island was. I mean, it wasn't one of the big islands. It was the smaller islands. And if I get a hold of my date books, they're all about Colombia. I could tell you exactly what we were, but I don't remember. It was in one of the smaller islands in the Caribbean. And they were there. And I was with Pat. I think that's because Pat and I had our own villa. I wish I remember the island now. And they were staying in their own place too. And then we went out on a boat. I'm not big for oceans, and typical of the Kennedys. But it was a lot of. It wasn't just Ted and Vicky and me and Pat. It was, I forget, it was like Christopher was there, and I think little Bobby, and there was about 4 or 5 of the other children there. And I remember, the one thing I remember most about that trip is they threw me off the boat. Literally, it didn't ask, could I swim?
What do you mean they threw you off the boat?
They literally pushed me off the boat. We're on a yacht.
As a joke? Or because you had done something?
No, just a joke. Everybody was, and I'm floundering. And Ted said, we better throw him a lifeline. So they threw this thing, but what do you call those round things, like an inner tube?
Yeah, a lifesaver.
Yeah, and only I couldn't reach it. So at that point, Joe Kennedy was with little Joe was with us. He jumped in the water and got me out. But it was, they find all that, I mean, like dumping me naked in the hall of my bedroom, or throwing me off a boat when they weren't sure I could swim. I mean, all that they found terribly amusing. Bill's character, don't you know?
Yeah. Could that have been like the mob roots?
Mm-hmm.
Like the mob roots, where like humiliation is funny, like physical humiliation. No, that's not a very. I don't feel like that's a very upper. I feel like that's more of a lowbrow kind of humor.
Well, it's very Irish, and it's very macho.
Yeah.
I mean, which because they're Irish, and it's very I mean, they were very rich, but that didn't affect the culture. So we get to go eat.
Almost. And then so
you want another drink?
I'm okay. So let's just quickly touch on Carolyn Kennedy. You just knew her because you were friends with the others.
I don't mean this in any arrogance, but the Kennedys were part of the social world I moved in. Yeah. And I had friends from to the left of the Kennedys and friends were way to the right of the Kennedys. There's a certain point, I don't mean this in any pretentious way, but there's a certain point, particularly in New York. I'm talking about not high society in the sense of Mrs. Astor. Well, of course, she was pretty much part of the game too, but I would call it public society. People who were involved. People who were involved in one way or another in events or projects, lifestyles that brought them to public attention. And so the people you would move around, or people in the theater, people in the movie industry, politicians, writers, creative people, and they had those people in general had a kind of tolerance for disagreement and disputes.
They probably appreciate it to some extent. I mean, that's someone who's a politician. It's about debate. Right, so you enjoy debate. You have to enjoy debate on a certain level. I mean, there are probably politicians who hate being contradicted and who have maybe some sort of inferiority complex or something. I can see that too. But you should. I mean, ideally, you should enjoy discussing ideas and having people.
Ted would say, Pat always traveled with books. Everywhere she traveled, she had a bag of books that she was reading. And I knew something was wrong because I forget, we were flying somewhere and she had a bag of books. And, and I did what I always did, pick the bag up. So I looked at the books, kissed everything I wanted to read. And there was the Hemingway's Movable Feast. I said, haven't you read that? Oh, she said, yes, but I'm reading again. And then there was a book by Fitzgerald. I can't remember which one. And she'd read, but she was reading again. And all the books, 4 or 5 books she had with her, were all books she had read before but loved and was reading again. And that's when I knew there was something was wrong. I didn't know she had cancer then, but I knew.
Are you still in touch with the Kennedy family?
We're at a Christmas card level.
Was it after the death of
In fact,
and Ted.
I'm not close to them anymore because nobody lives here.
Yeah. And the people who you were close with are dead. Is that fair to say?
No, it's close. Past kids. Well, Christopher's dead. More or less true. Yeah. Eunice's gone.
What was?
Good. You're getting soused.
You indicated that you didn't like Vicky, Ted's.
No.
Why is that? Why didn't you like her?
Because she didn't do it big and she couldn't get away with it. She forced his closest friends out of his life.
Were you close with Eunice? What was your relationship like with her?
It was through her that I met Maria and then and Arnold. But I met Arnold before. I met Arnold separately.
Are you still in touch with Arnold?
No.
When was the last time you spoke?
Oh, years ago. I met him because I was I was in Hollywood. One time I was trying to sell scripts, writing scripts. And Richard and I were in Hollywood, and I'm staying with a producer friend of mine named Leslie Wallwork, film distributor in Beverly Hills, and we went over to. Husband was a big director. I just lost the name. Richard and I went over her house to have to go swimming. Bob Rafelson's wife. I can't remember. And so Richard and I are there, and by the pool. God, I wish I could remember her name. And and I'm in the sun, and suddenly the shadow falls over my body. I mean, literally, and I had this, I don't know where. So I said, well, I think she's in the kitchen. I looked up, and this bodybuilder with his bodybuilder friend was there. I said, I think she's in the kitchen. And I said, I'm trying to get some sun here. And so we went into, so that's Toby Ravelson. That's the first time I saw him. And then Richard and I moved to London for a year, a little more than a year. And we were living at the Dakota, that was the building on 72nd. And so I sublet the apartment, big mistake, to Richard Chamberlain, who was an actor, and we went to London. And while I was in London, the phone rang, and it was Arnold. And he was saying that he was in town promoting his first movie. What was the first movie? It's about him being a bodybuilder, whatever that movie is. What is that movie?
Conan the Barbarian or something?
No. Before the first movie, it's called Iron Man or something like that. It's about bodybuilding. And so he was in London to promote it, and he was staying at the Piccadilly Hotel, and he told me he was in town and not to tell anyone where he was staying. He already had this movie star fantasies going through his head. I mean, no one in London ever heard of him. And so he said, I said, well, what are you doing in town? And he was promoting his first movie, whatever it was. And I said, oh, well, great. I said, I'm having dinner. I'm going to a dinner tonight. I'm having dinner tonight. I said, why don't you? I said, Norman Alexander is in town. He was a really rich guy. I can tell you about him some other time. But at Annabelle's, which is a club, and I said, why don't you come to dinner with us? So he came to dinner. It was me and Richard and Norman Alexander and two of Norman's hookers. He loved hookers, beautiful girls. And Arnold and the Duchess of Argyll. I can't remember her first name either. Something Argyll. You can look it up. And she's a great woman. And we had a great time. Said Annabelle. Great time. And the next day, the Duchess of Argyll was she was an absolute, completely 86 by London society. And that's because she was involved in a very raucous divorce case with her husband, the Duke, in which among the charges made against her is that she had gone to bed with two of the Duke's dogs, among the other indiscretions they claimed she had committed. I didn't know whether it was true or not, but anyway, she seemed to say fetch a lot. Oh, can you fetch me the napkin over there? She was a great old broad. I can't remember her name, what her first name was. So anyway, so he came to dinner, and they got along famously, and then the next day her solicitor called me and said he was calling for the Duchess, and did I have Arnold's phone number? And I said, I'm sworn to secrecy not to tell anyone where he's staying. And he said, well, I'm sure somehow we can find out. And they said, by the way, do you know what he charges for an overnight? And I said, I know I don't, but I imagine it's quite a lot. True story. Margaret, Duchess of Argyll, that's who it was. Margaret, Duchess of Argyll.
And did you give the phone number?
I don't think, no, I didn't. No. I'm sure they found him, but no. I said to him, years later, I asked him, asked him if Margaret Argyll ever called him. He claimed not to know her, never had dinner at Annabelle's. He didn't know, he never was in London promoting his film. He started out at Gold's Gym in L.A., and I'm not saying I'm not accusing him of this, but one of the things famous about the gym is that it's a place, if you're into bodybuilders, where you can rent them. And I suspect, being, attractive and a German, and, his father was a Nazi. Did you know?
Yeah.
You did know that.
Well, in your interview, it's interesting, in your interview, you talked about it a little bit.
You're getting drunk.
You talked about it a little bit. And then but it wasn't publicly discussed at that time, I don't think. And then he later, 15 years later, he talked about it.
About his father.
Yeah, being a Nazi. And the way that he talked about his father was very similar to the way that you had kind of framed it for him.
Well, I mean, the sense I got is that Arnold's attitude about that is that his father had no choice. Because if you wanted any, his father
wasn't he in the SS?
Huh?
Wasn't he in the SS?
Well, he was a school teacher.
And wasn't he I remember from your interview that he was kind of disappointed in how it all turned out.
Yes. I mean, the attitude, the sense I got is that his father was immensely surprised after the war to learn what he saw essentially was a boys' club. It was a social activity, had been involved in these heinous crimes.
But he went into he went into the Soviet Union. It's not like he stayed at home. He was part of the occupational force, as I remember.
Well, I can't remember that.
I think I'll listen to the tapes.
He was a Nazi, yes.
Yes.
And you can't be a Nazi except by choice.
Yeah.
So there's no...
Certainly you can't go from Austria to, outside of St. Petersburg,
yes, right.
Or Leningrad.
That's right.
Without having some awareness has to kind of seep in.
It's somewhere.
You're not just you're not just part of the circus.
No,
you're
no. Somewhere you're going to say, "Oh my God, that's why we're here." Now, do you want to eat, or what do you want?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you one last thing, and then we'll go eat. Because I was just curious. So you had this interview with Betty Ford.
Is this going to be printed? Are you going to type this up?
It'll be transcribed.
Because I would love to have a transcription of it.
Okay. I can do that. So you met with Betty Ford. I'm just curious, do you remember?
A great woman.
Were you close? How many times did you meet with her? Were you close with her? How did that meeting happen?
Well, I was interviewing her for Prague, and we got along great. And
was there only one interview?
Yeah, but a lot of the famous people I came to know for a long time after the interview. I met through the interview. Mm-hmm. And that's how I met her. But it goes back to we had friends in common, and which is how the world works. I mean, I don't care who you are. If you're Betty Davis and you're a friend of, she became a good friend of mine. But you're a friend of someone she knows. She's going to trust you to a degree enough to let you into her house to talk. The thing I think I've told you this before, the key, and it's absolutely, I used to be able to get people to tell me this unbelievable stuff, lots of which I never published, because you have 10 minutes, tops, first 10 minutes you're with someone you never met before to win their trust. If they don't trust you, they're not going to tell you what you need to know. Yeah. And trust is based on the ability that you're not going to hurt them, that you will be discreet about what you publish.
Yeah, they want to confess everything.
that everybody feels misunderstood.
Yeah.
They want to understand who they really are.
And people like talking about themselves. It's part of when you talk about your problems to someone, you're processing, you're thinking about that problem, you're getting someone else's input, you're continuing to,
But the key is you've got 10 minutes talking where they have got to forget they're being interviewed.
Yeah.
Where it just becomes a conversation. Because they all feel misunderstood. They all have an urge to explain themselves to you. So you understand how good they really are, how misunderstood they are.
Yeah.
And what I would always do is within the first 10 minutes, I would tell some terrible story about myself.
Yeah.
I'd say, oh God, I'm so hungry. I really got to stop drinking. Between the drugs, the coke, and I mean, that's why I hate being in Los Angeles. Forgive me, I'm in not my top form here, but it's just, I hate Los Angeles. Do you like Los Angeles? And then you go on. But you confess some sort of, so they think they have something on you.
Yeah.
And it works.
So what did you tell Betty Ford?
I can't remember. I don't remember the interview. But you do all that before you turn the tape recorder on.